I'm going to preface this video with a video that I recorded yesterday. I just recorded a little pod episode talking about different roles in the ecosystem of politics, because I think oftentimes some people forget that you may be on the same side or same team, but because it doesn't look a certain way, people will just assume or they will place you on the other side of the fence. But I do believe that it is actually quite imperative to recognize that people play different roles in the ecosystem and that the arts are actually quite important in that. So I also read off The Peril by Toni Morrison, where she defends artists, but I also liken it to she defends writers specifically, but I also liken it to just in general defending artists and extending that generosity instead of re-perpetuating what the state does, which is policing and censoring and making up pretend litmus tests to figure out where a person stands when they're right beside you. So let's get into it. Cause you eating smoked duck in Morocco, Tony Yayo. I often consider the hashtags that exist and the emojis that are used currently due to censorship. And I talked about this in a previous episode where I read off words that are now federally banned, and the list continues to grow via President Trump. So on government websites, there are a list of words, and those words are very commonly used during the political climate and when people are working to not only rebel, but protect themselves against systems of domination, against police, currently now against ICE, right? So we have the hashtag Free Palestine. Free Palestine, the flag began to become banned online. So then people began to use the watermelon, right? So the watermelon was very popular, and we understood that the watermelon was a representation of the Palestinian flag because they shared the same colors. Moving forward, topics of rape. People cannot say rape online because it has been censored. Your video will be flagged, or you will be prompted to read a memo that says that you're violating community guidelines. So hashtag rape has turned into grape. So people are using the emoji grape to, excuse me, discuss rape. Nigga. You can say nigga, but you can't necessarily type it out. I've had multiple TikToks where I wasn't able to use the term nigga, and so I was violating community guidelines. So instead of nigga, people use ninja. And these become state approved words, which literally just goes back into the language that people use to describe certain things that are now banned on government websites. But it doesn't just stop there. It extends through all social platforms. These are now state approved languages, and these languages include emojis. But these emojis only exist due to censorship. So this is how language is evolving. When the watermelon was circulating there, I made a post and I prompted the question, how can people understand that watermelon now translates to Free Palestine, but cannot grasp that nigga also translate to friend, homie, lover, and friend? I prompted this question more so as a statement because I had a growing frustration with people who have a selective linguistic acceptance of language, especially as it evolves throughout time. So this was okay because it aligned with many people's mission, vision, beliefs, as related to the political climate, right? Nigga will always be a part of the political climate. The language is used all the time, and it has been used for a significant period of time. And so this is why I personally use it in my personal practice. And I wouldn't necessarily say, no, I would say it. I'm an advocate for the use of the language because even if you disagree with the language being used, You can't deny that it exists, and a culture and a social culture has evolved and developed through it, within it, as well as outside of it. And that's a bit tangential, but it goes into selective linguistic acceptance. Okay. I was prompted with a question online with someone that I mutually followed on TikTok, and they sent me a video, which now I reflect back, and it was pretty much a litmus test, right? They wanted to see where I stood politically. I failed miserably. Don't test me, especially if you're not letting me know that this is a test. I failed because I'm not a participant in virtual activist couture. Virtual activist couture essentially looks like this. Oftentimes, what I have observed, not everyone, this is not a generalization. This is me talking specifically on some of the observations that I have made. This virtual activism couture begins and ends here. And so they asked me essentially why I don't participate in this. I expressed that I didn't participate in this particularly because I like to expound more and I do my own personal research. And then I engage in conversations with people who perhaps we could come up with solutions on how to be participants, right? I participate through my artwork. My practice is of and related to vengeance, not only in contemporary times, contemporary but in contemporary times, because I'm reflecting on things that have happened before me. So I believe in retroactive vengeance as well, and it exists inside of my work. So I don't necessarily have to post these emojis to prove to anyone that I am politically engaged and politically activated. I am a Black woman who grew up an avid reader, occupies academic spaces and institutions. I have been in courses where I am the only, not only the only Black person, but the only Black woman. I am well aware of what the fuck is going on. Okay. And I can become even more aware of what is going on through having discussions and discourses with people on the ground, people not on the ground, people who are directly affected, and those who are not directly affected but want to be engaged. This is social media, virtual activist couture. I failed their litmus test, right? This is literally the image that I use on Substack, okay? The folding chair from the Montgomery Brawl, coupled with the Black Air Force Ones, which for me, I use as a portal to input all this essentially Black agency, and Black agency as a means to remain still, to practice peace, to retort back, to rebel. This is what this is. This is who I am. This is what it is currently. I don't have to post emojis so that other people are fully aware that I am engaged. I shared online. I've been meditating with social justice emojis and the litmus test people prompt online as though the work begins and ends there. And for many people, it does begin and end there because they eat a smoked duck in Morocco. What the fuck else can they do outside of post these emojis? Was I offended? Yes. But then I also was reflecting because I began to meditate with guilt and shame and like, Sonny, why don't you post these emojis? Why don't you post the watermelon? Because I'm engaged in a completely different way. And I do think that it is imperative to remain open to see how people engage politically, instead of automatically putting them on the other side because their engagement and their activism doesn't look exactly like yours. We have the hashtag fuck ICE. And fuck ICE has turned into this. All of it is relevant. All of it is valid. For those who don't know, ICE stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. There's been a lot of frenzy right now. There's been a lot of death. There's been a lot of Deportations, okay? The ICE operation ordered by the Trump administration is currently operating by deporting criminals illegally in the country. And I say criminals loosely, okay? These people are not criminals. This includes migrants with no criminal record and US citizens. So it's very important to also investigate the language that is being used. I understand that there are people within the country who live in the country who are perhaps undocumented, but they still are not. It's very important to investigate the language and to also investigate who's writing the language. This is what it looks like online, even more, okay? It also encouraged me to think about the blackout in 2020, which was a direct response to George Floyd being murdered. And so people on social media were encouraged to post these black squares, almost kind of observing. It's a lot. It's metaphorical. Observing blackness, observing black death, observing black life, and also perhaps metaphorically synonymizing itself as a moment of silence, but virtually. So this was a way for people to come together online to share with others that they were standing. But oftentimes what happens with these types of social media activism, this virtual couture, is that it can easily become performative. It can easily become performative, where people are only posting so others do not attack them or question them. Because you don't want to remain in the hot seat. This is George Floyd, who was murdered over $20 and trying to buy some cigarettes. And it was counterfeit. Suspicion of it being a counterfeit. I'm still reading the undercommons, so I'll be quoting the undercommons for quite some time. In the undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study, Fred Moten and Stefano Harney portray the undercommons as a fugitive, resistant mode of social life that eludes institutional capture and fosters shared collective forms of action and study rooted in Black radical traditions. In other words, resisting professionalization and capitalist metrics like credit and governance. Although I feel like this is reflected online through people sharing what they have going on and how they align themselves politically, I also consider the fact that it's still social media and it's governed by someone. And the only reason why you're using emojis and rephrasing, shifting that phraseology, is due to censorship. It's due to professionalization. It's due to you not being able to elude institutional capture. Not saying that it's not necessary, and it is still very valid, but this is the reason why much of the language has evolved. And for me personally, I'm not really interested in using language that and is not able to elude institutional capture. I would much rather root my language when I'm writing and when I'm speaking and as I'm learning to be a bit more direct and succinct and not performative, not to begin and end with a singular post. I had asked what's the difference on my timeline because I also began to meditate with when people were posting these black squares, and it's going back to selective linguistic acceptance. Many people were also upset. There's a couple of reasons. I don't know all the reasons, but one of them is that the timeline was being flooded and overwhelmed. So people were not able to receive critical information during 2020 during the protests and the hashtag Black Lives Matters. All that information was being overwhelmed by these black squares. So during that time period, when you were scrolling, it was just black squares and black circles. And now you have fuck ice with these emojis, which is embraced fully. This is selective linguistic acceptance. And it evolves and people grow to accept it because people begin to learn that even though it may not affect you, there's going to be a moment in time where something does affect you. And that's when you begin to accept different ways that people protest or activate themselves through activism. So I began thinking about The Peril by Toni Morrison, which I'm going to read to you all. A writer's life and work are not a gift to mankind. They are its necessity. The moment I began feeling shame and guilt for not participating in emojis as a way to, as a bandera, as a flag to denote where I stand politically, I had to remind myself of all the work that I have been doing and continue to do and how I engage myself to learn new information. I mean, even just showing up here and, I'm looking up different ways to see and not to create some type of hierarchy on how people are participating to make others aware of these systems of domination, of this type of oppression, of this type of whiteness, of this type of practice that really puts people in danger and causes harm that also leads to death. And in that, I'm going to protect the writers. I'm going to protect the artists. I'm going to protect those who aren't necessarily online. I'm going to protect those that engage themselves in other ways outside of just posting emojis. If all you can do is post an emoji, but don't create these invisible litmus tests or macroaggressive litmus tests for other people. And when they don't pass, you automatically put them on the other side when they're right beside you. This is Toni Morrison, and we're going to read The Peril. Okay. But before we get into it, from In These Times, where there's a word. So today I also learned about imperialism, and oftentimes, sometimes we're reading words and we're not really understanding what they mean. And I do think it's important to learn what these words mean instead of just reading over them and not returning back because it just sounds foreign, or deciding that they are too politically charged to engage beyond. Okay. I'm going to just read this excerpt from In These Times archive, which elaborates on the themes of Morrison's racism and fascism, with warning that fascism is recognizable by its determination to convert all public services to private entrepreneurship. And so, sitting with this, I also think about how when people are participating in virtual activist couture on social media, now it comes with a paid promotion. Pay me and I will say this. Pay me and I will wear this. Pay me and I will advocate this. Pay me and I will advocate on behalf of this person, X, Y, Z. Everyone's getting paid to speak on certain things. It becomes capitalist by nature. It becomes an institutional capture. It becomes that's what it becomes. It becomes a playground. It becomes performative. It becomes, oh girl, did you see that I posted this? Did you see that I did this? Everyone has to see that I did this, that I got paid for this. Fascism is a far-right, authoritarian, and ultra-nationalist political ideology that emerged in the early 20th century Europe, characterized by dictatorial power, forcible suppression of opposition, and strong regimentation of society and the economy. This is important to remember, just kind of plant it in your mind. And it got me thinking about The Peril by Toni Morrison, because when you're a writer and you're a thinker and tinker beyond just posting emojis, you understand but the language that you use is at your own risk, at your own peril. There are certain things that you can or cannot say on certain platforms because quite literally there's a state governance. There's a state governance that exists online. So when certain people say certain things, they are flagged and their content or their posts or their words or their writings are deleted. This is why language has evolved. If it's not state or government approved language on social media, then it gets deleted or you're flagged or you're deemed, even when you're posting and you're thinking about other professional institution or entities looking at you, even if the person is acting as a perpetuator of the state, you're thinking about possible opportunities that you may not receive anymore because of the language that you use, because you're expounding beyond these emojis. If you are somebody who has the capability and you're critically thinking beyond these emojis and writing about it and speaking about it, that is at your own peril, okay? So many of us are thinking about that. Peril by Toni Morrison. And I'm actually going to share this page that I found on Substack that also shares the full text, which was perfect for me. Let me find it for you all. Period. And shout out for Bleak House Books for having this. Excuse me, y'all. Peril by Toni Morrison. Authoritarian regimes, dictators, despots are often, but not always fools. But none is foolish enough to give perceptive, dissident writers free range to publish their judgments or follow their creative instincts. They know they do so at their own peril. They are not stupid enough to abandon control, overt or insidious, over media. Their methods include surveillance, censorship, arrest, even slaughter of those writers informing and disturbing the public. Writers who are unsettling, calling into question, taking another deeper look. Writers, journalists, essayists, bloggers, poets, playwrights can disturb the social oppression that functions like a coma on the population. A coma despots call peace, and they stanch the blood flow of war that hawks and profiteers thrill to. That is their peril. Ours is of another sort. How bleak, unlivable, insufferable existence becomes when we are deprived of artwork. That the life and work of writers facing peril must be protected is urgent. But along with that urgency, we should remind ourselves that their absence, the choking off of a writer's work, its cruel amputation, is of equal peril to us. The rescue we extend to them is a generosity to ourselves. We all know nations that can be identified by the flight of writers from their shores. These are regimes whose fear of unmonitored writers is justified because truth is trouble. It is trouble for the warmonger, the torturer, the corporate thief, the political hack, the corrupt justice system, and for a comatose public. Unpersecuted, unjailed, unharassed writers are trouble for the ignorant bully, the sly racist, and the predators feeding off the world's resources. The alarm, the disquiet, writers raise is instructive because it is open and vulnerable. Because if unpoliced, it is threatening. Therefore, the historical suppression of writers is the earliest harbinger of the steady peeling away
of additional rights and liberties that will follow. The history of persecuted writers is as long as the history of literature itself. And the efforts to censor, starve, regulate, and annihilate us are clear signs that something important has taken place. Cultural and political forces can sweep clean all but the safe, all but the state-approved art. I have been told there are two human responses to the perception of chaos, naming and violence. When the chaos is simply the unknown, the naming can be accomplished effortlessly. A new species, star, formula, equation, prognosis. There's also mapping, geography, landscape, or population. When chaos resists, either by reforming itself or by rebelling against imposed order, violence is understood to be the most frequent response and the most rational when confronting the unknown, the catastrophic, the wild, the wanton, and what word is this? Incorrigible. Y'all, I looked this up yesterday, but I forgot what it means again. And I'm can't pass it up without looking it up again. Of a person or their tendencies not able to be corrected, improved, or reformed. Okay, period. Catastrophic, wild, wanton, or incorrigible. Rational responses may be censure, incarceration in holding camps, prisons, or death, singly or in war. There is, however, a third response to chaos, which I have not heard about, which is stillness. Such stillness can be passivity and dumbfoundedness. It can be paralytic fear. But it can also be art. Those writers plying their craft near to or far from the throne of raw power, of military power, of empire building and counting houses. Writers who construct meaning in the face of chaos must be nurtured, protected. And it is imperative not only to save the besieged writers, but to save ourselves. The thought that leads me to contemplate with dread the erasure of other voices, of unwritten novels, poems whispered or swallowed for the fear of being overwhelmed by the wrong people, outlawed languages flourishing underground, essayist questions, challenging authority never being posed, unstaged plays, canceled films. That thought is a nightmare, as though a whole universe is being described in invisible ink. Certain kinds of trauma visited on peoples are so deep, so cruel, that unlike money, unlike vengeance, even unlike justice or rights, or the goodwill of others, only writers can translate such trauma and turn sorrow into meaning, sharpening the moral imagination. A writer's life and work are not a gift to mankind, they are its necessity. There's just a lot there that I feel like is articulated into words so incredibly that aligned with how I was feeling when this person questioned my engagement, or not even questioned really, prompted me with a litmus test so that I could prove whether or not we were on the same team. And I immediately had to remove any guilt or shame that I was experiencing because my engagement just looks different. So if you're out there, do not feel guilty if you are not necessarily outside protesting, if you are not necessarily holding a weapon, if you are not necessarily posting emojis online, if you are not necessarily creating 60-second videos online to post on the reel. It is very okay to figure out what's going to be in your arsenal. And that is your activism. That is your protest. Some people's protest is with their pen and paper. Some is with their thinking. Some is with how they show up day to day. Some people are in complete survival mode. and are just trying to get to the next day. And it's not a difference as hierarchy, it's difference as difference. We can show up differently and still be on the same team. And I do believe that because I shared my writing with them as well, they didn't think it was enough because I didn't post an emoji. And I think it's imperative for people to not contort a simple share of an emoji with an expound. The ecosystem or the assembly line is filled with people who are participating in ways that just may not look like how you're participating. I'll talk to you niggas later.